Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for APL Reader's Corner with the Aurora Public Library. My name is Tessie, and today we're going to be talking about a book of translated literature, Convenience Store Woman by Murata Sayaka. Right, and this is a book that is translated from Japanese, so definitely forgive me for my mispronunciations of the Japanese names and places and words. But I'm really excited to discuss this book with you guys today. If you've never joined us for APL Readers Corner, this is a program where we pick a book from a different genre. So it might be a genre you've never even thought of reading before. And we pick a book from that genre and we just kind of discuss it. And so, like I said, we're discussing Convenience Store Woman by the writer Murata Sayaka. And so on the actual book cover itself, you'll see Sayaka Murata. And so in Japanese, I usually put their last name first. And so I'm just going to adhere to that standard because I know that's how they do it in Japan. But I read this book and I was really intrigued, I want to say. So for any of you guys who are stumbling across this program, you've never read this book before, this book came out in 2016. It won a very prestigious prize in Japan, and it's gone to sell 1.5 million copies in Japan, and it's been translated in a bunch of languages. I want to say 22 languages from across the world. And it's a very successful book coming out of Japan from this woman Japanese author. So I was really excited to start reading it. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a summary for those who haven't read this book before. Right, so this book is about Kikyo Furukura. All right, like I said, I'm going to get some of the Japanese wrong a little bit. So Kikyo is her first name, so it's really Furukura Kikyo. And she's a 36-year-old woman working part-time at a convenience store. And she's been working there for 18 years. And so this book basically starts off, she's working at a convenience store, and she has a lot of societal pressure that is telling her, oh, why are you still working at a convenience store? Why aren't you married? But Kikyo has always felt a little bit different ever since she was a child. And so I'll go into a couple of quotations a little bit later, just so you get a sense of how she feels different. So I want to say the really great part of this book is sort of the language that comes out of it. Some of it is really humorous and some of it is just straight to the point and hits really, really hard. But she just feels like she's different, and the people around her seems to view her as different. So she's kind of on this quest to like fit in as a human, which I think is one reason why this book has been so popular across the world. Is I know sometimes a lot of people ask ourselves this question, how do I fit in? And so this is about Kikyo trying to find out how she can fit in into her place in society. And so this is her journey on how the convenience store where she works kind of helps her become a human that she wants to be, and kind of how the societal pressures are still saying, oh, that's not good enough. And so she meets someone at the convenience store and she's like, oh, maybe I should try and be more normal, like everybody is telling me to. Like she has kind of pressure from her family, from her sister, that she can be fixed. And it doesn't say explicitly in the novel, but I would say just reading from it that maybe she is on the autism spectrum, but that's just a speculation because the author doesn't say anything and neither does the actual book. And so she meets someone and she's like, oh, maybe I should move in with this person, and like maybe I should think about starting a family with this guy. But in the end, like you'll find out without spoilers kind of where her journey takes her. So like I said, this is a very popular book, and a couple of quotations just to kind of get a sense of where this book sits, because I want to say, having read this book, now that I've finished reading it, I'm like, oh, I kind of enjoyed that book. But I want to say when I first finished it, a couple of hours afterwards, I was kind of having an existential crisis. I'm like, oh, I don't know the way the world works, like just kind of seeing the world through her eyes. Like after I was finished, I was like, oh, okay, I see things completely different and it doesn't fit in how I usually see things. And so it was a bit of a disconnect. But now that I've taken some time to think about it, I like this book. So a little bit, like there's one quotation that really struck with me. like that Kikyo has. And she has a quotation where she says, "The normal world has no room for exceptions and always quietly eliminates foreign objects. Anyone who is lacking is disposed of." And so she has a lot of these thoughts where she's trying to figure out, how do I come across as human, because people are saying that I'm lacking. And even though she doesn't, like, her voice, she's very confident person, I want to say, in herself, but she's also, there's that fearful aspect where she's like, oh, I am a little bit afraid of what's going to happen to me if I'm not accepted. But she starts off with a really great childhood. She has a great family life. And like one of the underlying themes is that she had a great family life. So she doesn't really have an explanation for how she is as a person. Like she didn't go through trauma during her young childhood. And so it's like she visited a therapist just once and the person was just like, oh, you just need to, as far as I can remember, they're like, oh, just keep treating her with love and affection, and which is what her family did. But it didn't really change who she was as a person. And so she's kind of figuring out how to fit in. And then there's this another quotation that she has that kind of explains her as a character, is that you will eliminate the parts of your life that others find strange. Maybe that's what everyone means when they say that they want to cure me, right? I want to say one of the things that stuck with me during her journey on this particular aspect is that she observed while working at the convenience store that people would start acting like people that were around them. So she'd have in a new set of coworkers at the convenience store, because obviously it was a part-time job. You had a lot of people going in and out just as employees. And so every time there'd be some new employees, the people around them started matching their personality, like, and so she would follow along with that. So she was like taking a real observation to be like, oh, these are how other people work. And so they kind of match the people around them. So she had this one really bright and bubbly coworker. And so then there's this one scene where she meets up with some friends afterwards and they're like, oh, you've changed. Like you've become more like personable and bubbly. And she's thinking to herself, yeah, I actually did that on purpose because I have a coworker who's like that. So I'm trying to be more like her. So I fit in. So I thought that was really interesting. So besides the characters, I think this is a really great book to just kind of examine like the human condition. A little bit about the author is that Murata Sayaka, she was born in Japan, in Chiba, Japan, and she was raised there. And a lot of her books, so this is her first book that has been translated into English, like her first novel. Like she's had some novellas, I think, that have been translated as well, but this is the first novel. But she's written a lot that are in Japanese and that are pretty popular in Japan. But this is the first one we're seeing in the US and kind of the English-speaking world, or English-speaking literature world. But she likes to explore nonconformity, and kind of, she likes writing about women that are considered abnormal, right? And she likes to like look at gender roles. I think one of her really big things on the reason on why she writes is she likes to kind of examine society, like societal norms, and be like, why is something like that, and kind of experiment with it and being like, oh, I have this character who might not fit into this societal norm, what happens, right? And so she's a really large upcoming voice in Japan that's very unique. So a lot of people think her voice is very unique coming out of Japan, and in Japan itself, kind of exploring these kind of topics like gender roles, like what does it mean to be a woman, like nonconformity, and parenthood is a really big one in her books. It's mentioned a little bit in Convenience Store Woman as well. So it makes for a really exciting author, I think, because you're getting a lot of new ideas, which I think is one thing that you can take away from translated literature, because you have all these books coming out of an English-speaking narrative, and I want to say the parts of the world that speak English have cultures that we might be familiar with just because we've read so much literature from these different cultures if you're a big reader. But when you're reading translated literature, you're getting kind of viewpoints and perspectives from other parts of the world that don't necessarily speak English, that have different cultures and different ways of doing things, and different history, all of which feeds into a different perspective that you're kind of getting, which I think is always really great with translated literature, is getting that different perspective. That's what I think makes translated literature so amazing. So let's see, this particular book was translated by Ginny Tapley Takamori. So with translated literature, I don't know if anyone watching is familiar or has a second language or is familiar with the way that when you speak a different language, sometimes it just makes your brain work a little bit differently. And it's just because it's a different language, sometimes there's like different intricacies around it. So the translator for this particular book, I thought it was interesting when she said that when she was translating, she had to be very creative because Japanese is very context-based versus English, which is very grammar-based. And so what I'm taking from that is that, so in situations in English where we would very point something out like in clear language, we'd be like, oh, like this is the way it is. In Japanese, it might just be an illusion. So she would be taking the Japanese like writing and then having to turn it into a language that was very direct and like spelled things out. And so she would be adding a lot to it. And so I think in her interview, she said she worked very closely with the author, like she did her rough draft, went back, had like some questions on, oh, like what did you kind of mean on this? So I can make sure it's spelled out in English. But I always find translated literature really interesting because there's so many different ways you can translate something depending on what the other language is. So it takes a lot of creativity. So if one person translates a book, it's going to be completely, well, it'll be sort of different than someone else who might be translating it. Another thing that you'll see in convenience store women is that Kikyo has this phrase that she says as part of her manuals, like as this is how a convenience store employee works, right? And so she got this manual when she first started working there. And I think that's one reason why she loved working at the store so much is because she got a manual that told her exactly how to do her job, but also how to like be a human is what she took it as. And in part of that manual for every customer that comes into the store, she has to greet them. And so basically that phrase is, and I'm going to butcher this, I'm sorry, yeah, so I said that completely wrong, but it's a phrase that basically means welcome in English. And the translator decided to keep that phrase just because it's something that's so unique to Japanese culture, and it would sound a little bit weird for just Kikyo to just yell out welcome every time that someone was coming into the store. So you get these kind of different perspectives when you read a translated literature, and I think you learn a little bit about the culture when you're doing that. And so hopefully you guys are inspired to check out Convenience Store Woman by Murata Sayaka. After watching this, I want to say that I definitely recommend it. It's a very short book, and it kind of, while you're reading it, sometimes you can pause and be like, why am I reading this book? But by the time you finish it, you're just like, oh, I'm having an existential crisis. Like this is like a whole different perspective, not just because of it being a translated book, but because of the character Kikyo herself and the way that she's thinking and kind of moving through the world and making her decisions. So it's like you really appreciate the book after you're finished and you get to sit down and kind of take it in a little bit. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed today's session of APL Readers Corner, and I hope you check out Convenience Store Women. That book is available on Overdrive through the Aurora Public Library, so you could check that book and read it. Overdrive works that if someone else checks it out, you just have to wait a little bit like a regular library book, but it's an online, so you can read it on your phone, on your computer. So it's very accessible, really easy to use. So hopefully check that book out, and I hope you all have a great day.